Rain drips against the glass. The city hums under a wet haze. Every footstep echoes slightly longer than it should. I don't know how long I've been watching. The apartment building is quiet, too quiet. Lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere inside, a life was about to end. I didn't know then who would die, who would survive, or how far one person could go to steal someone else's world entirely. My name is Javier Morales. I report on crimes most people prefer to ignore. I follow facts, records, and whispers that slip through the cracks of official reports. Tonight, though, I'm not chasing a statistic or an old headline. Tonight, I'm chasing a story that has never truly added up: the murder of Ana Pease. Ana was 37, living in Barcelona, working in real estate. Everyone who knew her described her as meticulous, careful, cautious. But on the evening of February 19, 2008, none of that mattered. On that night, someone stepped into her apartment not just to take her life, but to erase it completely. And the person who did it, Maria Angels Molina, known to friends as Angie, was someone no one suspected. At least, not until it was too late. I'm here because Ana's story isn't just a story of murder. It's a story of deception layered so deep it almost defies belief, of a person so skilled in crafting a false identity that even the law struggled to keep pace. And it all begins with what seems like a normal evening. I can hear the rain hitting the roof above me, steady, relentless. Every drop mirrors the rhythm of my heartbeat. I've been retracing Ana's last steps for weeks, reading police reports, court transcripts, witness statements, surveillance footage. There are gaps, details never fully explained, but patterns emerge when you stare long enough. Ana's apartment was on a quiet street not far from the city center. Neighbors remember seeing a figure entering her building, carrying a small bag, moving carefully, deliberately. The surveillance cameras captured only fleeting moments: a shadow crossing a hallway, a door closing. No one saw a struggle, no one heard a scream, at least not enough to report it. The rain that night might have masked every sound. I close my eyes, imagining the scene as Ana would have experienced it. The tap of rain against her window, the soft hum of the heater, the faint creak of the floorboards under her own weight. And then, the subtle change. The kind of detail only someone who studies a crime scene obsessively notices. A shadow that doesn't belong, a presence in a room that wasn't there before. At the time, investigators had nothing substantial linking Angie to Ana's disappearance. She was a friend, a colleague, someone who shared laughs and coffee breaks. But behind her smile, behind the careful charm, was a person who had built a life entirely on other people's trust. She wasn't just a thief of property or money. She was a thief of reality itself. And Ana's reality was about to be claimed. I've read the court documents repeatedly. Angie had spent months cultivating an image of normalcy. Bank statements, rental agreements, even personal letters, all fabricated. She borrowed from friends, borrowed identities, borrowed names. The deeper I dug, the more chilling it became. The murder wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, premeditated, methodical. The night Ana died, the city continued as always outside her window. Streetlights glimmered through the mist. Cars passed in uneven intervals. But inside her apartment, the air shifted. It's impossible to describe that shift fully without being there. But anyone who studies these moments notices the small things that feel wrong. A misplaced object. A door slightly ajar. Silence where there should be noise. I've spoken to neighbors, coworkers, even police officers who investigated the case. Everyone remembers Angie differently. Friendly, normal, unremarkable, until, of course, the facts emerged. Then suddenly every story makes sense in retrospect, but at the time no one suspected her. I can hear the faint tapping of a window pane, though the wind is minimal. My own breathing feels louder than it should. Rain trickles down in irregular patterns, mirroring the uncertainty of what I'm piecing together. There's a lesson in every drop. Details that seem mundane can hide the deadliest truths. Anna's disappearance was first noticed not by a scream, but by absence. She missed work, calls went unanswered, friends grew concerned. Only when the police arrived at her apartment did the horror begin to take form. The scene was orderly yet disturbingly precise. Nothing appeared forced, no signs of a struggle, but forensic investigators noted traces that didn't belong, small inconsistencies only someone trained to look could see. A subtle rearrangement, a door that didn't quite close. And most chillingly, signs that someone had been living another person's life right under everyone's nose. That someone, as the investigation eventually revealed, was Angie, but not in the way anyone had imagined. She wasn't a burglar in the conventional sense. She wasn't a casual con artist. She was a person who could inhabit another's life so completely that even friends, family, and colleagues were blind to it until the moment her deception turned deadly. I pause, listening. The rain fills the silence, masking the sound of the city. My notes lie scattered on the table. CCTV frames, photos of bank statements, emails. Everything points toward a person who is terrifying not because she is immediately threatening, but because she is ordinary enough to be invisible until it's too late. Anna's story didn't end with the police investigation. It rippled outward, touching every life she had known. Her disappearance exposed financial fraud, identity theft, and a level of planning that seems almost cinematic. And yet, the most horrifying aspect wasn't the crime itself, but the realization that someone could walk among you for years, building a parallel life, until the night they choose to cross the final line. As I sit here, the rain continues, steady and insistent. I replay the timeline over and over. The figure entering the apartment, the absence of alarms, the meticulous planning. Each moment raises questions. How did no one notice? How could someone plan so thoroughly and still act so casually? What did Anna see in those final minutes? This is only the beginning. The night Anna disappeared is just the first layer. What follows is a story of deception, of greed, of a calculated mind that manipulated friends, colleagues, and even the justice system. And as I trace each step, each lie, each small, deliberate action, I realize this isn't just a story about murder. The rain hasn't stopped. If anything, it has grown heavier, each droplet hammering the roof, rolling down the window, pooling in uneven patterns on the balcony. Every sound feels amplified, the city, the water, my own heartbeat. It's in these quiet, unassuming moments that a story like Anna's becomes almost unbearable. Because the truth doesn't scream. It whispers, almost imperceptibly, in the small anomalies, in the tiny inconsistencies that everyone else overlooked. After the police arrived at Anna's apartment, the first strange detail was immediately obvious to trained eyes. Nothing in the apartment seemed stolen, not money, not jewelry, not electronics. Yet the place had the subtle feel of someone's life being tampered with. Drawers slightly ajar, documents shuffled, a calendar turned backward by a single day, perhaps unnoticed by anyone but someone looking carefully. That someone, of course, was Angie, and this is where the pattern begins. On paper, she seemed ordinary, friendly, polite, even charming. But Anna had known her for months. If you asked her coworkers, they'd say, she was quiet, reliable, helpful, but in hindsight, they all missed the small signs. Angie's behavior had been layering itself into Anna's life like invisible fingerprints, borrowing small sums of money, asking odd, personal questions, offering to help manage errands or contracts. Everything seemed casual, nothing alarming, except for one detail. Angie had a remarkable habit of always being present at the exact right moment to witness minor mistakes, to intercept opportunities, to be the first to respond whenever Anna's life had a small disruption. I step closer to the window and press my palm against the cold glass. The rain streaks my vision. The streetlights bend their glow through the wet air, and I realize something. When you look at this case frame by frame, the horror doesn't lie in what Angie did physically. It lies in the way she mapped another person's life with precision, controlling it from the shadows. She was never careless, never impulsive. Every visit, every withdrawal from Anna's bank account, every fake email, every forged signature, it was part of a larger design that only fully revealed itself after Anna's death. Investigators eventually traced multiple anomalies: ATM withdrawals under Anna's name but performed by someone wearing wigs and gloves, surveillance cameras catching fleeting figures in her hallway. But at first, these traces were dismissed as coincidences. Neighbors remembered a woman in a brown coat entering and leaving at odd hours, but they didn't think to connect it to Anna's disappearance. No one did. I take a notebook from my bag and scribble the details, each word rattling against the rhythm of the rain. Every piece of evidence adds a layer, but it's the sensory impressions that haunt me. The quiet hum of the heater that night, the faint squeak of a floorboard outside the apartment, the distant wail of tires on wet asphalt. Every ordinary sound becomes tainted with the possibility of violence when you know what happened. The escalation of her deception becomes almost dizzying when you map it chronologically. In the months before the murder, Angie had been subtly replacing parts of Anna's life with her own. She had access to Anna's bank accounts, her emails, even her social circles. Anyone who tried to reach Anna received carefully crafted responses written by Angie. And on the night of February 19th, that careful orchestration culminated in murder. But it's not the murder itself that shocks me now. It's the calm, almost methodical precision with which Angie staged the crime. When forensic investigators arrived, the apartment was intact, almost pristine. Only minor inconsistencies suggested that someone had been living another person's life there. A single misplaced chair, a mug set differently, a closet door slightly open. The absence of chaos became the first sign of something profoundly wrong. I close my eyes and listen. The rain taps against the eaves. A distant horn echoes across the empty street. My own breathing sounds too loud, and somewhere in my mind I hear the faint click of a door locking, a sound I cannot place but that feels significant. In cases like this, the quiet moments are often the loudest. There's a rule in true crime that I've learned after years of reporting. The longer someone is able to manipulate their environment unnoticed, the more dangerous they are. Angie broke rules that no one even realized existed: personal trust, friendship, neighborly vigilance. She moved within boundaries that everyone assumed were safe. That is what makes this case so chilling. It isn't the confrontation, it's the complete invisibility of the predator. By examining her prior behaviors, investigators pieced together a pattern of manipulation. Angie had a history of exploiting acquaintances, financial fraud, even minor identity theft. But nothing in the records suggested she would escalate to murder. Yet the evidence was clear. She had mapped Anna's routines, habits, vulnerabilities, and waited until the perfect moment to strike. eliminating the possibility of interference. As I write this, I try to imagine Anna that night. Perhaps she prepared a late dinner. Perhaps she read a book by the soft light of the lamp, the sound of the rain against her window a comforting background hum. She had no reason to expect danger, and yet danger was already inside her life, hidden under the guise of friendship. This is where the story deepens. Angie's methodical theft of identity wasn't a one-time act. It was layered over years of careful planning, a network of lies, deceptions, and subtle control. The murder itself, as horrifying as it was only the culmination of a pattern that had been in motion long before anyone realized. And in the rain-soaked streets of Barcelona, I realized something important. When someone like Angie operates this way, the city itself becomes complicit. Every sound, every shadow, every casual observer unknowingly becomes part of the narrative. The subtlety is the terror. The layering of deception is what traps both the victim and the witnesses in a state of disbelief. I pull out another photo from the case file. Anna's apartment, lights dimmed by the storm outside. At first glance, it looks ordinary. At second glance, the details unsettle. A misplaced pen, a turned page, a cup not in its usual place. And behind those tiny, almost invisible cues lies a story of someone so calculated that their presence in another life felt like an invisible hand rearranging the world. The rain continues, persistent, almost deliberate. Each drop seems to echo the rhythm of her manipulations. Each sound, each stillness reminds me that this story is far from over. As I track each clue, each layer, each subtle break of trust, I understand the magnitude of what happened. Anna's life was not stolen in a moment. It was carefully dismantled over time, leaving the final act, a murder that stunned even seasoned investigators, as only one piece of a carefully orchestrated. The rain has slowed to a steady drizzle, but its presence is unrelenting. I can hear it in the gutter, in the drip of water from the roof, in the soft splatter against the pavement outside. Every sound pulls me deeper into the timeline of that night, that life, and the person who changed it forever, Angie. I've spent hours studying surveillance footage from the weeks before Anna's disappearance. At first glance, it seems innocuous. People walking past the apartment, the occasional delivery, the glow of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt. But then a pattern emerges. A shadow appears at the periphery of the frame, never lingering, always moving just outside the central focus. A bag is carried, a coat adjusted, steps timed with the precision of a metronome. The first escalation comes not in violence but in subtle manipulation. Angie's presence is almost imperceptible, but she breaks the rules of ordinary life in ways that would later make sense. Friends report small, strange occurrences, packages shifted, personal notes copied, minor conversations repeated verbatim back to Anna as if to prove attention, insight, control. At the time, they laughed it off. Who notices such details until it's too late? Rain dripping into my notebook, I realized that Angie's power was invisibility made intentional. People never suspected her because she never acted outside expectations. She moved quietly, adjusted herself to the environment, and left traces that seemed ordinary until viewed in hindsight. Each one of these traces is a thread leading to the horrifying tapestry of that night. On the night of the murder, Anna's routine was disrupted in a way that seems minor but now reads like premeditation. She was home alone, as usual, reading in the living room, rain pattering against the window, her thoughts drifting toward tomorrow's appointments. A delivery had arrived earlier, just a small package, but the tracking of its movements later revealed a tiny anomaly. The signature had been falsified. The name scribbled in pen was not hers, though it appeared convincingly so. This is the first clue that Angie was no stranger to crafting false realities, creating layers upon layers of trust broken without immediate detection. I've interviewed neighbors and colleagues, not in person but through transcripts and video testimonies. Everyone repeats the same thing. She seemed normal, too normal even. But when I overlay timelines, CCTV frames, and bank records, the small, almost invisible shifts stand out. Withdrawals from Anna's accounts were small at first, almost casual. But by February they had increased, timed to correspond with evenings when Anna was home, alone and unaware. The rain picks up again, louder now, drumming on the rooftop. It's as if the city itself is urging me to listen closer, to pay attention to every drop, every echo. My own breathing feels amplified in this quiet, saturated environment. The rhythm of the rain mirrors the pattern of the crime, steady, precise, almost soothing until it culminates in chaos. I find myself returning repeatedly to the night itself. Anna's apartment, orderly, quiet, seemingly unremarkable. Yet the forensic report reveals the subtle betrayals of space. A chair slightly moved, a door closed too carefully, a window latched in a way that implies observation. These are small details, almost invisible. But in the hands of someone like Angie, they are calculated, each one a signal that she had inhabited Anna's life fully, shaping it silently until the moment she chose to act. The escalation continues as I trace the financial irregularities. ATM withdrawals, forged documents, falsified letters, all meticulously timed. The sophistication of these actions implies premeditation far beyond a typical criminal act. Angie wasn't improvising. She was executing a carefully plotted script, with Anna unwittingly as the central character. There is a disorienting effect in studying these events. Time feels unstable. Days, hours, and minutes bleed together when you follow Angie's movements on paper. A withdrawal here, a copied email there, a meeting intercepted, a package signed. Everything is chronological yet elastic, as if the normal passage of time had been stretched and bent around her will. It's subtle but disorienting. And it's exactly the kind of distortion that traps a person in disbelief before the final act. At this point, I notice the first signs of behavior that doesn't belong to a rational person. Witnesses describe moments of tension, fleeting but vivid, a sudden insistence on borrowing keys, asking for seemingly trivial favors that later turn out to be critical, remarks that mirror private conversations only Anna and a few others could have known. These are not coincidences. They are the signature of someone studying another life with obsessive precision. And then comes a detail that chills me. Angie had prepared the apartment itself to mislead investigators. Certain traces were planted, DNA samples purchased online, objects repositioned, evidence designed to divert suspicion. The level of planning indicates not a momentary lapse but a long-term strategy of control, manipulation, and deception, executed with cold efficiency. I close my eyes, letting the rain wash over me. I can imagine Anna that evening, perhaps glancing at her phone, hearing the soft tap of water, feeling a slight chill in the room. She had no reason to suspect that the person she trusted most, the one who had helped her with errands, bank details, and correspondence, would turn that trust into a trap. Every small misdirection, every borrowed identity, every minor theft of her daily life was a step toward the night she would die. By now, it's impossible not to notice the layering of sensory details in the case itself. Even reading through witness accounts, I hear the faint sounds, the drip of water from a leaky gutter, footsteps in hallways, the subtle creak of floorboards. The city doesn't sleep. and neither did Angie's manipulations. She had accounted for sound, timing, presence, absence. Every ordinary auditory cue became part of her orchestration. At this stage, my reporting reaches a crucial insight. Anna's story isn't just about the act of murder. It's about the invisible architecture of control that Angie built around her. This is what makes the narrative so unnerving. It's not a sudden scream in the night. It's a series of meticulously executed, almost imperceptible acts that culminate in catastrophe. And the realization begins to form in my mind. This was worse than anyone had imagined. The rain slows again, leaving a steady, low patter against the glass. I lean back in my chair, feeling the weight of the pattern, the cumulative effect of subtle manipulations, false identities, and calculated misdirection. The rain has tapered into a fine drizzle now, but it still clatters against the window pane like a soft, unceasing drumbeat. I can feel the chill seeping into my bones, the wetness in the air mixing with the thick, electric tension of the case files spread across my desk. Each page, each photo, each witness transcript carries its own whisper of deceit, and slowly a pattern begins to emerge, one that changes everything. Until now, I had been tracing actions, movements, and subtle manipulations. But the midpoint of Anna's story isn't found in the streets, the ATM withdrawals, or even the falsified documents. It is found in what was intentionally hidden, in the deliberate holes Angie left in her own narrative. And the deeper I dig, the more terrifying it becomes. Anna's life wasn't just stolen. It was mapped, copied, and redesigned by someone whose ambition knew no limits. I've reviewed the CCTV footage again, frame by frame. And now I notice something I had missed before. Angie appears in two places at once, almost imperceptibly in overlapping timelines. The signature on a package delivery, the figure in the hallway outside Anna's apartment, a bank transaction timestamp. Each seems normal in isolation. But when pieced together, it becomes clear that she was manipulating multiple streams of events simultaneously, bending ordinary schedules to her will. The rain outside has softened to a whisper. Every droplet against the eaves sounds like a tiny clock, marking the slow unraveling of normalcy. I notice my own breathing, slow at first, then catching in uneven rhythms. The sound of the rain masks everything, yet paradoxically amplifies it, making each minor shift, each faint sound, impossible to ignore. There's a creak in the floor above me, though I am alone in this apartment, and for a second, I can feel the same disorientation Anna must have felt. Small, subtle, unexplainable sensations that set the mind on edge. What hits hardest is the staging of Anna's murder. At first glance, the scene seemed almost ordinary. No forced entry, no shattered objects, nothing missing. But forensic reports reveal careful manipulations designed to mislead investigators. Purchased DNA samples, misdirected evidence, rearranged objects, everything crafted to suggest someone else might be responsible. Every small act was meticulously calculated to redirect suspicion, to hide the hand of Angie herself. I reread the witness statements. Friends recall conversations with Angie where she asked pointed, seemingly casual questions about Anna's routines. What time would she leave the apartment? Who had access to her building? What accounts did she hold? Each question seemed harmless at the time. Now, in the cold light of analysis, I see them as pieces of a puzzle being fitted into place. Anna wasn't just a victim of murder. She was a victim of years of meticulous observation and manipulation. A low rumble of thunder punctuates the drizzle outside. The sound vibrates through the walls, through the floorboards, and through my chest. My pen scratches against the paper with renewed intensity. Each revelation comes with a creeping dread. How does one confront someone capable of this level of deception? How do you measure the scope of a crime when the crime is not only an act but a lifetime of planning? The more I examine Angie's prior actions, the more disturbing the connections become. Investigators later discovered anomalies surrounding the death of her former husband in 1996. Details were sparse at first, the reports thin, but the echoes of similar manipulations, careful planning, disappearance of key evidence, small misdirections, reappear. I can't help but wonder, was Anna the first target she killed for identity, or merely the first documented victim to fall under the weight of her full ambition? The possibility chills me. Even as I write, I can feel my pulse quicken. The case files, the photographs, the records, they are not just information, they are pieces of a larger, terrifying pattern. I hear the rain shifting from steady to scattered. A loose shutter rattles in the wind. The combination of sensory overload, the sound, the isolation, the information, creates a disorienting effect. My mind begins to move faster than my pen. It is at this moment that the realization hits. Anna's death was the apex of a carefully constructed lifelong operation, and the full scope of Angie's manipulations may never be entirely understood. I think about Anna in her apartment that night, the same apartment I have studied endlessly. Perhaps she was folding clothes, listening to the rain, thinking about nothing more than tomorrow's appointments. Then, without warning, a person she trusted completely became the instrument of her erasure. The familiarity of friendship, the comfort of routine, the ordinary sound of rain, these were all part of the trap. This is the moment where panic begins to creep in, though I am only a journalist piecing together history. The evidence is overwhelming, yet its subtlety makes it almost unbelievable. I lean back, my eyes tracing the reflections in the window pane. The city outside is calm, indifferent, yet every raindrop seems to carry the echo of a stolen life, a misdirected investigation, a manipulation that went undetected until it was too late. I return to the court documents. Angie's methodical fraud, the purchase of DNA samples, the falsified signatures, all indicate a mind capable of planning with surgical precision. And yet, despite the depth of evidence, her demeanor in court remained calm, collected, almost ordinary. The dissonance is horrifying. A person capable of extreme manipulation who can maintain a facade so convincingly that even professionals were initially deceived. By the end of that night's review, I am struck by the layering of horror. This isn't about a single crime scene or a sudden act of violence. It is about control exercised invisibly over time, through manipulation, observation, and premeditation. Each small action, each borrowed signature, each tiny intrusion into Anna's life was part of a carefully constructed symphony of deceit. And the crescendo, the murder itself, was only the most visible note in a score that had been playing for years. As I close my notebook, listening to the rain's soft patter against the roof, I realize that the story is far from complete. The midpoint has arrived. This is worse than I initially imagined. Anna's life was not only stolen, it was meticulously rewritten by someone with unmatched skill in deception. And the chilling truth remains. The consequences of that night echo far beyond the apartment walls, far beyond the rain-slick streets, far beyond Anna's absence. Rain hammers the city now, relentless. Every drop is sharp, punctuating the dark. My notes tremble under my fingers. Each detail I've uncovered presses against me. Anna's life rewritten. Every withdrawal, every falsified signature, every tiny intrusion. It's all a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to Angie. I imagine her that night, moving quietly, purposeful, each action measured. Anna, unaware, reading in the living room, rain pattering on the windows. A sudden shift, a shadow crossing the apartment. Silence thick enough to choke on. And now I see it all clearly. The calm planning, the preparation, every detail meticulously placed to mislead, but there's something else. The panic was also calculated. It wasn't blind. It was designed to manipulate perception. A staged struggle here, a misplaced object there. Angie left traces meant to confuse, misdirect, delay discovery. I lean closer to the files. My pulse accelerates. I read a witness statement again. She asked about Anna's schedule, about when she'd be alone, just casual questions, casual, ordinary. But now they're instructions. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Footsteps outside the apartment. In my imagination, in Anna's apartment in the streets of Barcelona. Someone moving with purpose but unseen. I hear it in my chest, heartbeat, thunder in the distance. The rain masks it yet amplifies it. My pen scratches rapidly, short sentences, tight thoughts, breath uneven. The chase is invisible but palpable. Anna never saw it coming. None of us did. And yet there were signs, small, subtle. A window opened slightly. A chair moved. A cup turned over. Little things that hint at someone operating inside another life. I trace the events. Angie withdrawing money, buying DNA samples, forging letters. Each step is deliberate, each moment timed. The chaos she leaves behind is controlled, not random, not impulsive, precise, calculated. Each action designed to maximize confusion and delay detection. The storm outside grows. The sound of rain on metal echoes like distant gunfire. I hear the soft rustle of papers. My breath quickens, short sentences. Ideas pile up faster than I can write them. The narrative itself feels jagged, panicked, but it's deliberate, like the crime, like the plan. I close my eyes. I can feel Anna's fear in fragments. The soft sound of rain, the hum of a heater, the slight creak of a floorboard. Then the intruder, someone she knew, someone she trusted. Each step measured, each breath quiet, each second an eternity. And then the apartment is quiet again, too quiet. The traces remain, the evidence of planning, the deliberate chaos. The life stolen, Anna gone, but the aftermath lingers, papers shuffled. Signs of someone else's presence. DNA samples purchased. Forged documents. The manipulations echo like a heartbeat, consistent, unrelenting. I jot down the financial irregularities. ATM withdrawals, account transfers, each time-stamped, each precise. The chaos, in fact, is a mask for precision. The panic is constructed. Each moment designed to create fear, but on her own terms. The city outside is drenched. Rain streaks the windows. My hands are damp, breath catches. I can almost see the sequence. Anna entering the apartment. Angie following unseen. The interactions invisible to everyone else. The final act. Short paragraphs, short sentences, each word a heartbeat. Each line a step in the choreography, controlled chaos. Panic measured, directed, nothing random, everything deliberate. Investigators describe the scene as confusing at first. DNA planted to mislead. Objects positioned to suggest multiple intruders. Evidence fabricated to suggest coincidence. But the pattern emerges in hindsight, all orchestrated by Angie. The chaos is artful, the panic surgical. I pause, listen. The rain softens, yet it still drips, the city's hum. The subtle creak of a floorboard in my own apartment. Each sound reminds me. The pattern continues long after the act itself. The manipulation survives. The control persists. Anna is gone, but Angi's method remains. The storm is fading. My breath slows slightly, but the tension lingers. Every detail reconstructed, every lie exposed, the panic controlled, but the horror, the meticulous precision, it is permanent. I think of the aftermath. Angie arrested, tried, convicted, prison sentence. Yet even that resolution is partial. The web she wove is vast. Friends, colleagues, investigators, all ensnared in fragments of her manipulation. The panic, the chaos, the fear, still echoing. I close the files. The rain is a soft patter now. The storm outside mirrors the storm of actions, the deliberate panic, the calculated terror. Anna's life stolen and rewritten. And yet, even as I breathe and listen, I know the story doesn't end. It cannot. Each sound, the drip of water, the faint hum of a street lamp, the whisper of the wind, is a reminder that control can persist beyond the act of violence. The rain has eased into a persistent drizzle, a gentle background hum that feels almost alive. I sit with the files, the evidence, the notes, the photographs, and the recordings. Anna's life, reconstructed in fragments, stretches across years of meticulous planning. And Angie remains the constant, the orchestrator, the invisible hand behind every shift, every manipulation, every stolen moment. The court case concluded. Angie was convicted, sentenced to prison, years behind bars. Yet the verdict, the judgment, the closure, it feels incomplete. Because the true horror isn't measured in years served. The real terror lies in the invisible web she spun around Anna, around her friends, around every unsuspecting life she touched. I close my eyes and let the drizzle fill the silence. Each drop against the window pane is a heartbeat. Each faint creak in the apartment floor, a whisper. The city breathes, wet and alive. And I realize the danger, the manipulation, the theft of identity, it continues to echo. Not in violent acts, not in immediate threats, but in the subtle, lingering control she exercised over reality itself. I revisit the timeline. Months of surveillance, of bank records, of witness interviews. Each thread leads back to her. The panic she orchestrated, the chaos she controlled, the careful staging of a murder. It all reflects a mind capable of bending ordinary life to its own rules. Anna's death was only the most visible part of a much larger pattern. And the echoes remain. Friends who were manipulated, colleagues who unknowingly handed over small pieces of their lives, investigators who traced clues and thought they understood, only to find layers they couldn't have predicted. The truth is not neat. The conclusion is partial. Even now, years later, the lingering questions outnumber the answers. I step to the window. Rain streaks the glass. Streetlights reflect in puddles like fractured memories. I think of Anna in her apartment that night, unaware, listening to the soft patter, preparing for tomorrow. And I think of Angie, quiet, composed, calculating, turning those small details into a trap. Her life intertwined with Anna's, yet always one step removed, always controlling from the shadows. There is no sudden scream here, no dramatic confrontation. The terror was invisible. The manipulation was subtle. The panic deliberate. And as I trace these events, I understand that the true story is not about a single act of murder, but about the relentless erosion of trust, identity, and perception. The rain softens further. My breath slows, but the tension lingers. I replay the sequences in my mind. The ATM withdrawals, the forged letters, the DNA samples purchased online. Each calculated act was part of a carefully designed architecture of deception. And it worked. For Anna, for Angie, for anyone who would come to investigate later. Even the investigators, in their pursuit of justice, were caught in the invisible patterns. They traced evidence, reconstructed events, and ultimately identified Angie as the perpetrator. But the fact that she could operate in plain sight for so long, the ease with which she manipulated reality, leaves a lingering unease that no sentence can erase. I sit back, listening to the drizzle, and notice the small sounds that never left the narrative. The hum of a heater, the distant drip of water, the faint rustle of papers. Each one reminds me that the story isn't static. The echoes of her manipulation persist. They are quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible, but they are real. And that is the final terror. Closure exists only in law and judgment, not in reality. Anna's life was stolen and cannot be returned. The sequence of events, the careful orchestration, the invisible hand behind the tragedy, all continue to resonate. And for those who examine it closely, the lingering question remains: how much of our own lives are vulnerable to manipulation that we cannot perceive until it's too late? I write the final note in my report. The conclusion is partial, unresolved, yet undeniably true. Angie is imprisoned, but her influence, her methods, and her deception are far more lasting than any verdict could account for. And the story, while documented, continues to echo in the spaces she manipulated, in the lives she touched, and in the shadows left behind. The rain outside softens further. Streetlights glimmer against wet asphalt. The city exhales. And somewhere in the quiet, there is a single, lingering thought. How do you know when the life you trust is truly your own? The answer is not simple. The narrative leaves gaps. The files are full, yet incomplete. And as I close my eyes and listen to the rain, I realize that Anna's story. If stories like this matter to you, the ones with unanswered questions and details that never quite fit, consider subscribing. New true crime documentaries every week.